Hello, and thank you for joining us on Ask a Historian. I'm Matthew Wilkinson, historian with Heritage Mississauga. And each week, we invite you to send in your questions, and we'll explore the fascinating story of the city of Mississauga together. This week's episode focuses on some street names and the stories behind them, and we welcome our special guest, author, historian, and former City of Mississauga councillor, Dave Cook. So thank you for joining us this week as we explore some street names in Mississauga. Well, joining us this week on Ask a Historian once again is Dave Cook, local historian, author of several local history books, and a twice-running former counselor for the city of Mississauga. I know in past episodes we've recounted some of your political career and the fascinating chapters between those parts of those services on council. But today we're going to focus more on local history and some of the things that you have connected with and explored both personally and in your books with regards to street names. Some of the more common questions we get in Mississauga is, how did something get its name? And well, so here we're going to, for our chat today, we're going to try to answer some of those questions. I know with you, we'll get into one where you had a hand in naming one of the streets, and we'll certainly talk about that today. But wondering if we can start off with, we have a couple on our list here with aviation and or military themes. And wondering if we can start the ball rolling with something like Anson Drive and Lancaster Avenue.
Well, Lancaster, actually, there's a connection here. Let's go back to World War II. When Canada, the government of Canada, agreed with London, England, to manufacture the Lancaster bomber in Canada, because of course, Canada, they felt, couldn't be bombed by the enemy during World War II. We were too far away. The company was, the Lancaster bomber was being made in England, and they kept getting bombed. So we started to manufacture a Lancaster bomber right here in Mississauga, where Pearson Airport is. And the Lancaster, actually, we built 421 of them up there. Well, during the process of manufacturing the Lancaster, it was done by a Crown corporation called Victory Aircraft. And what they did was, a lot of the wartime housing in Malton on the roads, Churchill, Victory, Anson, and Lancaster, just to give you an idea, were named because of our involvement with the Lancaster and World War II. The Lancaster, of course, because of the aircraft. Now, the Anson was also an aircraft. And that was actually, if you get back, before Victory Aircraft became a Crown corporation. When they built Toronto, Pearson Airport, originally was called Malton Airport, the city of Toronto built it because they wanted an airport away from the city of Toronto for bad weather landing. So the National Steel Car of Hamilton came along and said, okay, we're building an Anson aircraft. So they built the hangars at this new airport. And immediately we went to war, and immediately the Anson was no longer being built. It became Victory Aircraft, and they built the Lancaster. So Anson was named after the Anson aircraft, right, as was Lancaster. Churchill, of course, Winston Churchill, to honor the prime minister at the time. And Victory Crescent was because of the Crown Corporation Victory Aircraft. So that's sort of how you get Lancaster, Churchill, Victory, and Anson.
And just to connect the dots for those that aren't aware, Victory Aircraft after Second World War would become Aviaero Canada, and Aviaero, most famous, of course, for the development of the Avro Aero, the same site that built the Lancaster bomber. So just kind of neat ways that we see on our landscape, remembering these moments in our history of what there's an old saying that people don't name things after things they want to forget. And this is a good example. Not only do we have in what we'll talk about today, we have something significant like the Lancaster bomber and its contributions to the Second World War, but we also have families on our list too, and how their names get connected to communities. So next on our list here, Dave, we're a couple of local Dixie area families commemorated in a couple of street names, Paulston and Stanfield.
Well, very quickly with Paulston, Paulston is a combination of Powlett and Stanfield, which were the two major families in this area, Dixie and Dundas area, the Powletts and the Stanfields, and so they named Paulson Road after the two. That led up to what I guess what you would call the Dixie Curling Club.
Right.
Now, but Stanfield, that is an incredible name, and I don't think any name of any road in Mississauga has more international impact than the name Stanfield, apart from, of course, the aircraft that we just talked about. But in modern times, the name Stanfield is known all over North America as well as in Germany. And there's a reason why, and it's really interesting. But let's start with Gordon Stanfield. Gordon Stanfield was originally, when he moved in here, he grew up and he became a member of the Toronto Township Police Force. He became deputy chief of the newly established Mississauga Police Force. And he became staff superintendent when it became the Peel Regional Force. And Gord Stanfield was a great, great hockey lover. And he founded the Mississauga Reps Hockey League, and he founded the Dixie Burnhamthorpe Hockey League. And he, in his efforts in the community, both him and Pala were awarded the Queen's Silver Jubilee medals. So, you know, Gordon Stanfield started things going, and he had 7 children, 7 boys. And they all, and this is where the name Stanfield started to impact across North America and in Germany, because it's all hockey. If you're an NHL fan, you must remember the name Jack Stanfield. You got to remember Fred Stanfield and Jim Stanfield. They all played in the NHL. And actually, Jack only played 1 game in the NHL. He was brought in as an injury replacement in the Stanley Cup playoffs, and he played 1 game. But he actually was in the World Hockey League for 3 seasons, and the newly established WHL. And then he was one of the founding members of the World Hockey Association. So, you know, he just was so involved internationally in hockey. Now, Fred, the next oldest, he played in the NHL with the Chicago Blackhawks for 2 seasons, and then 6 seasons with the Boston Bruins. And then the younger Jim played 2 games in the NHL, but then went into the World Hockey League. Joe Stanfield, the 4th brother, he wasn't big in hockey, but he was with the Mississauga Fire Department. And then Vic Stanfield, he went to play for Krefeld, Germany. And he did a beautiful job over there. He played 9 years for Krefeld. And the story goes, and I did research this, and it's interesting, that one of the last game that he played, it was announced that he was no longer signed by the team owners, and the entire audience booed. You know, he was so popular over there. And that was Vic Stanfield. And then Paul, the next brother, he went into a trucking business. And young Gordy, the youngest, he ended up playing for Krefeld, Germany for 1 season, came back for holidays in the summertime, and sadly was killed in a head-on car crash here in Cooksville. So that's the Stanfield name, and the Stanfield Road. Of course, Stanfield Road was named after Thomas Stanfield, who arrived in our country, in 1840, I believe it was, something like that. Arrived in Streetsville, and then eventually moved down to what was the second line, which is now Stanfield. And the name Stanfield came about because of T.L. Kennedy. The premier at the time had requested the township to name it after Thomas Stanfield because of his contributions to the community. So the name Stanfield really hits, you know, something.
I'm just marveling at what the household must have been like for Gord Sr. raising 7 boys. That had to be an interesting experience of parenthood.
And one of the daughters, Wilma, became Wilma Duck and became very popular in baseball. So
really,
yeah.
And so, but also back to Paul Stan, which of course is associated with the Stanfields. The Pallets and the Stanfields were instrumental in Dixie Arena Gardens as well.
Oh, for sure. You know, the in my book, the Dixie Beehive book that I wrote, I have a picture of the what they called the Mafia group. And the reason they nicknamed them that was because they all wore black coats and black hats, you know, and they were jokingly called the Mafia, but they weren't the Mafia. I mean, they were very honest, good businessmen, and they started Dixie Arena. And the Pallets, of course, were the big family behind it,
Right.
and of course Stanfield's extremely involved. But the Pallet, it was the Pallet family that really drove the foundation.
I remember just, again, connecting to the Pallets. I mean, uh, that name is all over Mississauga as well in terms of both municipal and business history. The city recently unveiled Pallet Green, which is a new park adjacent to the former Pallet, one of the former Pallet properties, because there were several Pallet properties. But just a prolific and I don't know what the right prolific and involved family in local history. Contributed greatly. They had the orchard, Pleasant View Farms was the Pallet Orchard, but they're also involved with the Dixie Cold Storage and of course Dixie Arena Gardens and a fruit market, and just both the Stanfields and the Pallets very much tied to the life of Dixie. Quite.
Well, that's true. And the interesting thing was, touch wood here, I like to boast a little bit about Dixie. My father was born in Dixie in 1910. But the Cook family, and I might add here, the name, the road name Cook in Cooksville has nothing to do with my family. Okay, that was Thomas Cook. But my family, the Cook family at Dixie, my grandfather was a farmer there, but and they knew the Pallets and the Stanfields, but they didn't get involved in anything like that.
Right.
So I can't take any credit there.
You were the neighbors who knew them.
That's right. Yeah.
Well, you said, and where was the farm again? Where was your family farm?
Okay, actually, if you just picture the northeast corner of Dixie and Dundas,
Right.
okay, go one, so the next building over, there's a small little plaza there.
Yep.
And in front of that plaza, there's a little square optical building. And that's the exact property location of where my grandfather's house was. And I pushed that down, thankful to you, many years ago. I got the concession number.
I remember that.
I went over there, knocked on their door, and I went into the receptionist and I spoke to the manager there, and I said, "Is this your property?" And he said, "Yes, concession one," or whatever it was. And he said, "Why are you asking?" And I told him, that was my grandfather's house.
Well, I mean, it is fascinating when you look, you peel back the layers and kind of see where the properties are underneath, because I always say that, wherever you live or walk in Mississauga, somebody has lived there or walked there before. So it is marvelous. And, here your grandfather lived in Dixie, your father was born in Dixie. And, that brings us perhaps to the origin of Dixie Road itself, of course, named for a beloved doctor. But what do you have? I'm putting you on the spot here a little bit, but have some early family stories about Dixie. There must be some connections to Dixie as a name, as a community. Of course, named after Dr. Beaumont Wilson Bowen Dixie. But how about some of those early stories? Your father must have had some memories of growing up in Dixie.
Sadly, yes. But sadly, my father died many years, 50 years ago, and
Right.
a very young man. And we never really talked too much about his childhood there. A few things we did talk about. He talked about Fred Hedge, who I ended up knowing. I lived next door to Fred over here in Applewood Acres. Fred Hedge and my dad went to the school that is now standing there. It's still standing, the Dixie Public School.
Right.
And he told me a little bit about that, and when they went to that, it was built in, I believe, in 1920. So he was about 10 years old when he went to that school.
Right.
And Fred Hedge went there, and Fred actually told me more about that than my dad did. So, because Fred used to walk from what is now the North Service Road up.
That would have been quite the journey.
It would be.
And of course, for people of a different generation who may not have known that building as a school, for many it was the driver training education center for quite some time by the Ministry of Transport. So
That's right.
yeah,
Yeah.
and still part of it. Still, I can't remember what its usage is today, but it's still, the building is still on our landscape today, is remembering that Dixie Public School era.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can remember as a teenager going there and watching ball games in what is now the parking lot.
Okay.
And yeah. But that's Dixie Road,
Yep.
after Dr. Beaumont Dixie. And yeah, and there's another one we'll touch about, Cody, another road. And,
Yep.
And that actually, well, let's get down to where I live in Applewood Acres and where Fred Hedge lives in Applewood Acres. That property originally was owned by the Cody family. Okay? The property basically, if you think in terms of Dixie, or not Dixie, but Cawthra and Dundas. So let's look at the southeast quadrant, the acreage, quite a bit of acreage from there all the way down to what is now the Queen Elizabeth, was owned by Philip Cody, who came up from the States in 1810, I believe it was.
Yeah, it was early. Yeah.
Yeah. And opened up a little, what would you call it, hotel type of thing, you know. Not a hotel as we know it, but, you know, for travelers. They could stop and spend the night and get some food there. And that was the Cody farm, if you will, the Cody Tavern. And that was Philip Cody. And he had a son, Isaac, and a daughter. And the daughter actually ended up staying here and moved to what is now Clarkson.
Yeah.
But the son, Isaac, after the War of 1812, Isaac Cody ended up going to the States, and he got married and had three wives. He died, the first two. The third one had a child named William F. Cody. Now think about William F. Cody, Buffalo Bill Cody, and that is a fact.
It is.
Cody's father was born on this property right here.
So what they connect together in our story, but on our list we have Haynes Road and Cody Lane, and I know there's a physical connection in their history, but you had a hand in the naming of one of them, and I'm wondering if you want to maybe talk about Haynes Road and then tell us how Cody Lane came to be.
Well, when I was on council originally, this is going back, a long time ago, I had a memo from the local fire department saying we have a situation in your ward regarding a road, and we have to rename a road. And so I had a meeting with the fire people at the fire department, and what it was basically the Queensway was being installed, and that would have, Haynes Road came from Dundas right down to Melton Drive in Applewood Acres, and the Queensway was installed, and they decided to cut off Haynes south of the Queensway. So that meant there was just one little piece with two houses on it on Haynes Road that the fire department would not be able to get to. So they wanted to change the name of the road. And I said, well, it's obvious. The road should be called Cody Lane, because Cody owned the property west of Haynes Road.
Yep.
And the reason Haynes was named Haynes is that the lady who owned the property on the east of that was Mrs. Haynes.
Yep.
So, it became, so they said Cody Lane sounds fine, and that's what happened. We ended up calling it Cody Lane.
When did Cody Lane get its name? Do you remember? That was during your first term, I believe.
Oh gosh, I'm getting old. First or second term, yeah, back in the early 80s.
Yep.
Yeah, the early 80s.
Did you have any opposition to naming it? I'm curious about the passage of name.
Not at all. They accepted it and put it through, and bang, it was done. I
did take a look at it on the map, and those two houses are still there. So there's a road in Mississauga with only two houses on it. It's kind of a neat little side part of history.
It really is, and I remember knocking on both their doors and saying, we have to change the name of the road, and the name is Cody Lane, and it's named after. And I explained the story, and they were just so impressed. They said, "Oh, we love it."
Yeah, I guess there wasn't a big fee for a change of address with only two houses. So
right. that's how Cody Lane came into being,
Yeah.
and of course Haynes came into being as well.
Yeah. Did I know we're going to talk about some Applewood ones as well, but did you ever have a hand in naming any others? I don't think I asked you that question before, but or at least input on the selection of names.
Well, in my most recent time on council, I did. Yes, I put in a name, and I'm hoping that the developer will continue to go with it, and it would be Lou Parsons Boulevard.
Right. Okay.
And it would be a road named after Lou Parsons, who of course originally was a member of council in Toronto Township, then went on to become the first chairman of the Region of Peel.
Right.
And then after he retired from the Region of Peel, he went with, I believe, Go Transit and became the manager of Go Transit, something like that.
And would this be down in Ward 1?
Yes. Oh, yes, it would be. Hopefully, touch wood, if they continue, it'll be one of the roads, one of the main roads in the new establishment at the south of Mississauga Road.
Wonderful, wonderful.
So that name has been registered and put into place.
Good for you. Good for you. We should pay tribute and a hat tip to those that came before us and help shape this land. And we've done that with Pallets and Stanfield, so there's a good example of continuing that trend forward. So.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. I mean, it's road names. People, the funny story here is that every time I drive along the Queen Elizabeth, and I think of when I passed Cawthra, I think of Wild Bill Hickok, or not Wild Bill, Buffalo Bill Cody, because that's where the property was at the south end, and the music fair they had at Dixie Mall. When you think about the very first program, it was with remembrance of that. But the point being is that no matter where you drive, you pass a road name, and it means something. There is a reason why that road is named what it is. Yeah.
So, what I said earlier, though, but people don't name things after things they want to forget. So it's it's part of connecting to our landscape. And even if us as say the current generation may have forgotten why the name is what it is, it still means something, and it's worth the exploration. So it's I know not every road name carries a meaning or carries something of significance, but I think it looks good on us when we do choose things that have a connection to this place or a connection to a theme, and it helps tell the story. It's fascinating.
Well, that like where I live in Applewood, of course, we were talking about some of the names in Applewood Acres, and the research I've done, I still haven't come up with total research, but I've got quite a list of names. They were named after apples, but not all roads in Applewood were named after apples. Some were named after some of the business people involved with the Ship Corporation who built Applewood Acres. Right. Like when you think of some of the roads, Victory, what is it? Candish Lane. That was named after two people involved in the banking with the ship company. Tragically, Harold Ship and Gordon Ship died before I could really talk to them both about it. I did a lot of research at their office, but one of the names, and the funny story is that Harold Ship told me that the name Jonathan. Now that Jonathan was an apple. Yeah. Now the correct spelling of Jonathan is Jonathan. Okay? And that is an apple in circa 1820 in New York, but it's the spelling in Applewood Acres is Jonathan, Johnathan. And Harold told me sort of with a bit of a grin, he said, Dad really thought that's how you spelt the name Jonathan, and that's how he spelt it.
So we have a misspelling on our landscape.
That's right.
I want to delve into Applewood a little bit more, but again, to put you on the spot, and I apologize, but can we give a brief background to the development of Applewood itself? I know there are three entities to Applewood: the Applewood Acres, Applewood Hills, and Applewood Heights. Just kind of you mentioned the ships. Could you talk maybe briefly about kind of the ship's contributions and how Applewood came to be?
Well, in my book, which no longer is in print, Apple Blossoms and Satellite Dishes, the history of Applewood Acres. It starts out in 1952 when the Ship family, now Gordon Ship was president of the Canadian Home Builders Association, and he was basically developing in a Etobicoke area, and he wanted to build a subdivision, and he moved west and bought the properties what we are in now on Applewood Acres. They were all apple farmers, and he bought the properties from these people. But he also had some property south of what is the Queen Elizabeth Highway on Applewood Road. Okay? And he built houses there in 1952, and then moved across the highway and developed Applewood Acres. Now, he built East Acres first, and that's over by Dixie Road. And then he moved west toward Cawthra. And he built 800 homes in Applewood Acres. Now, Applewood Acres is the largest subdivision built in North America today by what they call a single-family developer. In other words, it was Gordon Ship, nobody else. Gordon Ship, it was his company, it was his family that built the subdivision. Then they moved north of Dundas, and they started to build up there, but they didn't build all the houses. They only built a few. And the interesting thing here is that, you ever heard of the Ship brick?
Yeah.
The Ship brick was then put in any house that the Ship family built north of Dundas. And that showed that was built by Ship, not by anybody else, you know. Like, yeah. So there was other developers building in Applewood Heights and Applewood Hills. But the ones built by the Ship family had the Ship brick. And I was very, very proud when Harold Ship gave me a couple of bricks to put on my mantle. I ended up putting them in my houses in Applewood Acres. I've owned 3 houses in Applewood Acres, and 2 of them have the Ship brick in them. So, but that's where Applewood Hills and Applewood Heights came in. They continued the name Applewood.
Right, right. But so I know all of them have, you know, obviously there's a bunch of street names associated with many with the 3 different areas, or I guess the 4, because Applewood Road as well. And then just a little bit away from them is the Rometown Drive subdivision, which also kind of has an Apple theme to its history, but a separate company in that development. But in terms of you mentioned again a lot of names associated with apples, and we've got Tolman, Snow, Melba, Russet, Greening, McIntosh, Cortland, Wealthy, Rambo, Kendall, Primate, Jonathan with the misspelled, and all these names associated with different varieties of apples, and there's probably more on that list than what I mentioned. But you also have some that are not apple names, and one of which kind of loop back to our earlier conversation about Dixie's public school and going to school. We have a street named Hedge in there, and that, of course, with the Hedge family.
Hedge family, that's right. Fred Hedge, who was the son of the Hedge family that lived there originally, went to school with my father, and I became a good friend of his in 1980. He was really happy to hear I was running for council in 1979, and Fred gave me a lot of help and so forth. But that was Fred Hedge's house. Now the other, I live on Stewart Crescent, and the name Stewart is not an apple. It comes from the family that owned this part of the property, right. The Stewart family, and Stewart was actually a member of council of Toronto Township.
Oh,
and his house is still there, still on the service road. And then Watson Orchard over in East Acres, that was the Watson family. It's not an apple name. Candish, of course, was part of the business combination. Guthrie was named after a farmer, James Guthrie, who farmed in the area. And then Breezy Bray, interesting. And everybody says, oh, it's an apple. Well, it really isn't. It was Harry Whitefield's Breezy Bray farm, and where Breezy Bray Road is. And then Bartlett. Bartlett's kind of confusing. And you have some information on it. And the information I've got about Bartlett is that it's the historic family of apple growers in Massachusetts,
right?
The Bartlett family, and apparently they were quite historic over the last 100 years or so.
Could you, again, I'll put you on the spot because I didn't ask these questions in advance, but there's a legend and a myth of Applewood Acres of an apple tree in the backyard and a car on the roof.
Yes.
Can you share some of the insight on those myths, if you will?
They're not myths, actually. Harold Shipp and Gordon Shipp tried to keep at least one apple tree on every house property in Applewood. They felt that was so important. I've got one in my backyard. It's a little apple tree. A lot of the apple trees, of course, have been cut down because people didn't trim them properly and so forth. But when Applewood Acres was built, there was an apple tree in every property. Now, the car on the roof on the North Service Road, this would be east of just east of Stanfield on the North Service Road. There was a model home, and Harold Shipp had a car mounted on the roof as an attraction. They figured it would be draw people in, you know. So there was a car on the roof there. Yeah. Sure.
How did they get the car down? That's what.
Good driver.
Well, you were a race car driver. I mean, it would have been natural.
No, I owned the race car. I wasn't stupid enough to drive it.
What about just in terms of, you know, place names and how people connect to them? You've lived in Applewood a long time, and I won't date you there, but I know this has been your home for quite a many years. Do people connect in your mind with the place name of the area? Is there a connection to this tangible heritage of place names that they're proud of? I'm putting you on the spot again, and I apologize, but just to explore place names again.
Matthew, I think the problem in Applewood Acres now is that the majority of the people are not originals. You know, they're new people that have come in over the last, 20, 30, 40 years, if you will. The original people, they've pretty much all moved away, or died off. On my street alone, I can look at my street and say, hey, I was in Applewood Acres in 1956. Most of the people on my street weren't even born in 56. But, I'm almost 80 years old. I mean, you start to think back, and boy, that's a long time. But I think a lot of the people, in answer to your question, there's still a few people in Applewood that that would think of in terms of what you're thinking. Yeah.
Well, I think we've talked about it before, but with the development of your first book on Applewood, the part of the inspiration for that book came out of this unique story of this place that many of the residents didn't know about. And it's told in place names, right? Like this is kind of a neat way of exploring our history.
Well, of course, the joke about the book is it started out. I was asked by the homeowners association to do a little pamphlet to celebrate the 50th anniversary of Applewood Acres, and it turned into a 226-page book. But yeah, the Applewood Acres, when you start to really get into the history of it and you look into it, and then you look at what I find amazing about Applewood Acres is that when it was built west of Toronto, one of the reasons why there's garages, the original plan of subdivision did not have any garages on any of the houses, but the bank manager insisted with the Shipp family that people who live there will be working in Toronto. So they're going to be driving back and forth and they need garages for their cars. So garages were built. And when you look at the people who lived here originally, just amazing, the people, and it's in my book, just some of them to give you an idea. And I jokingly say that the most famous person in the world lived in Applewood Acres, known all over the world. He died, what, 20, 30, 40 years ago or something, but people still know him just by sight. White outfit, bow tie, little goatee, loved chickens. They say, you got to be kidding. Colonel Harlan Sanders lived in Applewood Acres on Melton Drive.
Yep.
I mean, it's just amazing.
Well, and your book explores that. And I know the book's out of print, but that's an excellent segue into, check out your local library and check out, used book sales and the like. The story of Applewood Acres is a fascinating one because it really, in many ways, sets the stage for what would be the suburban development of Mississauga. it's the forerunner to the big developments of Air Mills and Meadowvale and City Center with Bruce McLaughlin. But here's the Ship family building in the early 1950s of what would become a very key component of suburban Mississauga. It's a remarkable story.
Oh, it's incredible. Applewood Acres was the first subdivision built west of Toronto, the biggest subdivision built west of Toronto, and I think it was the foundation of the city.
Yeah,
where developers started to realize that, and they started to move out.
Were you? What brought you to Applewood?
Well, again, this is a funny story. My dad in 1940, 38, 39, 40 lived in Toronto in Swansea, and lived on Runnymede Road. I remember the house when I was born in 1942 till 1948. We lived on Runnymede Road, and at that time, Dad and his brother, he had 6 brothers, but one of them, Uncle Louis, they wanted to build a farm and grow chickens. They honestly, and my dad told me this, he said, we thought that chickens was going to be a future business, that, it was going to take off. And we wanted to be chicken farmers. So they bought property in Malton and Dad built his own house, and my Uncle Louis built his house. And I've got pictures of him actually laying bricks and me helping him just as a kid. But they built the house, and they started to build, to get the idea of the large, huge chicken coop barns. And just at that point, they got an expropriation notice from the federal government that the airport is being expanded, your property is going to be expropriated. Our farm was where Terminal 1 is right now. Well, anyway, we get the expropriation notice, and in 1956, Dad said, we're moving, we have to move, we got the money. He came down, he bought a house in Applewood Acres, and the reason he came back here is because he was born in this area, and he knew somebody that lived in Applewood, and he had been here, loved the area, and he just couldn't resist it. So in 56, we moved in.
So if the airport had gone somewhere else, we might be talking to Dave Cook, the chicken farmer.
That's right, exactly. But, no, that's very true. If they had not expanded the airport, if they hadn't done what they did, I'd still be up there.
Right. Did you any knowledge behind the house that you picked or the family picked, and was your family the first owners?
No. We had bought it. The house was built in 54 or 55, and it was a bungalow, and Dad didn't like the big 2-story houses that, like, I've got a 2-story house now, but he wanted a bungalow. And so this came up on the market, and believe it or not, I'm going to shock you, but you know what the price of the house was?
What?
$14,000. $14,000. Today it's worth $900,000.
A little bit of market appreciation there.
A little bit, yeah.
And how about you? How did you come to your house? When did you move into your house?
Well, we got married first of all, my dad died in 74, and Mom decided to sell the house and move to Trenton, where her sisters were, and that left me. And I had just met my wife Sophie. I just met Sophie, and so I had no place to go. So Sophie's mother said, "Well, she has a house where her father had lived downstairs in the basement, the beautifully finished basement area with a kitchen, bedroom, and living room, and the whole bit. It was a house down, 2 houses.
Yeah.
And I'm perfectly willing to live there until we get married. We were planning on getting married, and so Dad died. I moved in with where my wife is, with her mother's house, and a few months later we got married and got into an apartment. Well, after a couple of years, we decided to buy a house. Well, we looked at houses all over. We looked at houses in Etobicoke and so forth. One house built by Edmund Mundy, or Edmund Peachy rather, who built Munden Park. There was a house in Etobicoke, identical to what you see out here in Munden Park. But we liked that house. But then the real estate agent, Jerry Coulis, at the time, became a good friend of mine. But Jerry said, there's a house in Applewood Acres. And I said, really? And we went out and looked at it, and it was a bungalow, and very similar to what I had grown up in. And the price was right, and we bought it. So we moved into Applewood Acres again. So
what year was that?
76, I guess.
76, yeah.
Yeah, something like that.
And it's one of the ship houses?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I know you got a personal connection to the area and the story, so it's a fabulous one that think that you're living in one of the houses too. So.
Oh, yeah. And then we decided to, so that was the second house in Applewood I lived in. And then when my son came along in 1983, you know, my wife said, you know, we really need a bigger house. And so a house came for sale on Stewart Crescent, and we sold the house on Hedge and bought the one on Stewart. That's where I am now.
Applewood's not letting you go. You mentioned earlier, you know, the world famous person who lived in Applewood for a while at Melton Drive. I've never asked you this question before, but did you ever have an opportunity to meet him?
Yes. Interestingly enough, not in Applewood Acres.
Oh.
I met him on the start-finish line of the Indianapolis 500. The Colonel was, at that time, I was heavily involved in car racing. And I was a news reporter and a car owner, but I didn't own a car in Indianapolis, but I owned race cars up here. But I was down at the Indianapolis 500 as a news reporter, covering it. And I was on the start-finish line when they were loading the honorary race director into the convertible for the parade lap. And it happened to be a man named Colonel Harlan Sanders. And there he was getting into the car, and I said, hello, neighbor. And he says, what part of Kentucky are you from? And I said, I'm from Applewood Acres, Ontario, Canada. Oh my goodness, he says. There you go. Well, that's good. But I saw Colonel Harlan Sanders many times walk past the house with the kids following him behind. You know.
Oh, sure.
He went to the Applewood Church, United Church. You know, so.
Oh, just remarkable stories of kind of the who's who have lived here, and you know that's just one story of many, and I'm sure you know not only Applewood but others have stories as well. Perhaps we can do this again, Dave, and wander down memory lane with some other street names and places. I enjoy it very much, and
well, I've enjoyed it, Matthew. It's talking about the history of Mississauga is great, but when you're talking about the history that affected you or your family, it's even greater.
Absolutely. But on that, Dave, I think I'll say thank you very much for your time and for sharing your knowledge and your enthusiasm and your memories, and you're really helping walk us through some of the connections to place names or street names in our community. It's a fascinating way to look at our history. So thank you very much, Dave. I wish you well, and hope you're weathering the weather as we're taping this on a very snowy day. So it's but I appreciate it, Dave. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and everybody stay safe.
Thank you for spending some time with us here on Ask a Historian. Always a fun way to explore the story of this place as we look through some street names in Mississauga. And special thanks to our guest this week, Dave Cook, for sharing his knowledge, his memories, and his passion for history with us. And we look forward to exploring more street names with you in future episodes of Ask a Historian.